my big sin, though I acted a fool.
I guess I'd like to ask at this time if we could hear from the Women's Institute about their proposal and why they think their $100,000 bid is sufficient to the city of New Bedford. I will give you a little background that I was not at the City Property Committee meeting due to an illness. The week that they had the Property Committee meeting, I believe it was on March the 11th. And I really think the building's worth more money. I voted against it in the City Council, and was considered that night by Councilor Morad to be then withdrawn. And I just assumed it was being reconsidered until I got to the next meeting and it wasn't on there. And she submitted another reconsideration the night of the meeting, and that's how we got here tonight. I have spoken to the director of the Women's Institute. She said she was never afforded the opportunity to come before the council and tell them what they were doing with the building. I indicated that I was hoping that the building would come in around the $300,000 range, and I just thought it was too little. And I was going to suggest getting, another $50,000 if we could do that at this time. But I'd like her to say her piece before we get moved. Lonnie Wiley, if she could come up and give us a little overview.
State your name and address for the record, please.
Absolutely. Lonnie Wiley, Executive Director of the Women's Institute, Boston, Massachusetts. Good evening, Councilor. I would like to first thank you for this opportunity to speak with you tonight about the proposal that we submitted to you several weeks ago about the Ingrahm School property, and how regretful that we have taken a path probably different than both your council and our organization would have liked to have taken in looking at a new vision for Ingrahm School and for the neighborhood that it serves. As Councilor Saunders has stated, the proposal that was submitted by the Women's Institute included a purchase price from the city of $100,000. After careful review by our staff in drafting the proposal for your review, we had to factor in several indicators. One being the levels at which the state of Massachusetts will fund projects in our state. Per unit price factors in how much money can come from the state versus local services versus versus other sources as well. We are also, as an organization, very committed to making property as deeply affordable as possible to the neighborhood that it serves. And as you are aware, we had a very successful partnership with you in 2004-2005 in bringing the former Ingrahm School to reality as British Commons. And in doing so, I think reached the level of affordability that was much needed by that neighborhood, and also had a chance to revitalize and invest in a neighborhood that has had some pretty exciting things happen in the last 3 years. So in sharing all of that with you and looking at what we can offer, as you know, $100,000 was submitted in our proposal, it is very difficult for us to look at an increased price from that. A lot of careful deliberation went into it. My understanding is that you had another proposal come in under the RFP that was actually for less than ours. So it feels like ours was at least in the ballpark of what people thought could be factored into a development project such as this. What I assure the council is that in looking at what Ingrahm School will take to be a viable piece of its neighborhood in the future is a $7.5 million project. Of that, over 90% will come from sources outside of the city. And for a purchase price of $100,000, you will look at 18 units of affordable housing for low-income and very low-income members of your community. Have a chance to bring some truly wonderful service providers and agencies to a diverse neighborhood in your city, some of which are with us tonight, some that we've only begun to have conversations with in anticipation of what your vote would be. And then also to be able to provide a forum for that community to use it for what they would like it to be. And I guess what I would say in response to Councilor Saunders is that tonight we're here to really have a question and answer period with you. We would like to hear from you what your concerns are, what perhaps you have been looking for when you issued this RFP. However, I think the most important part of this review is what our community and your community would be looking for in this building. And that's the process that has not had a chance to happen yet. It was the step that we would have taken as soon as your designation was made. And unfortunately, what I would share with you is that actually your word letter arrived with us the day after that you voted to rescind your vote. So we haven't had a chance to ask your community and our community what they would like to see the be. And that's where I think it's a little preliminary to talk about a purchase price right now without hearing any other concerns that you may have had, that your constituents may have had, and or what might be a way in which we can all get to yes together on this.
Thank you. Another reason for the rescinding of the vote was it did not have a revert clause. If you look at the money that Women's Institute is looking for, if it is not available or some of these sources of funds fall through, you know, what were they going to do with the property? And we didn't have any recourse in its present form. Everybody says, well, we'll put that in, but it wasn't in there, and if they don't put it in, someone could have bought the property, the Women's Institute could have bought it for $100, spent all the money on architectural fees, and they realized they weren't getting the funding that they needed to build it out, and could possibly market it to another nonprofit for the same reason. Since the vote was taken in the City Council, a lot of questions have come up by community activists and people in the neighborhood, and do we need more low-income in a heavily populated low-income area? We need business so that we could generate a tax base from that building that has never been had one before. As I spoke to Ms. Wiley, I indicated that we're broke. And let me not kid you, when you're allocating this money, that building permits are down. There's going to be a huge drop. Houses aren't selling. Permits to do construction, people can't afford it. People are losing their houses. The tax base is shrinking. That means you're putting more on the backs of the taxpayers. People aren't buying new cars. They just can't afford it. Therefore, our excise tax revenues will be down. And you've got to factor in all these things when we're giving away buildings. I noticed in here that you know, the Women's Institute is looking for the city to give them $950,000 in home funds. Is that a number that the city's going to be able to provide? Do they have approval for it already? And if we can't provide that and say it's only $200,000, where does the other $750,000 come from? And is the project viable? And there's a lot of ifs in this proposal, and it's making me a little nervous. And that's why I rescinded it.
Does anyone else want to speak? Question?
Councilor Davis. I was set up to the antechamber with my colleague Councilor Gould on another issue. A presentation was made by the petitioner. Is that all that was done? Okay, good. I just want to, if I can have the floor, in addition to the comments that Councilor Saunders made about some of his concerns, I shared his concern as it relates to the reverter clause, but in addition to that, the other issue I had was that the last thing I wanted to happen was for this building to change hands and for the new owner not to have a timeline, if you will, as to how construction would begin and some reasonable timeline as to the completion date. I didn't want this building to change hands and just sit. And we've had this issue with other buildings in the city where someone has purchased them and nothing happens. And that certainly is not what I wanted for the community here. If we were going to sell this building to a bidder, which I believe was done in a fair and unbiased way, I wanted that bidder to have some kind of performance goals that they had to meet so that our building just didn't sit if, in fact, funding fell through, or there were construction delays, or the the plan changed, or their ability to talk with the community delayed them because there was differences in the opinion of the community members and the owner of the building. And I just didn't want that building to sit there. So I wanted some kind of performance goals and measures reasonable. we certainly could change them for specific reasons built into this as well. And all those conversations that I had were not part of the record. So when Council Saunders approached me and said he had issues, I voted to rescind my vote because I wanted the conversations and the concerns that myself and my colleagues had to be part of the official record, and they were not part of the record. And I believe that that's what this forum is doing tonight, to assure everybody that this council's concerns as it relates to this deal are in fact documented on the city's record. Thank you.
Councilor Gonzalez?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Could we hear from Mr. Sullivan, please? Now, tell me about the $950,000 in loan funds.
I'm sorry?
Tell me about the $950,000 city allocation.
That is something that was in the proposal. There hasn't been any formal application for that funding into our office.
That's all you have to say?
Well, no, I mean, there's a proposal for home funds in that submitted, basically.
Is that out of CDBG money?
It's a similar federal allocation to
On HUD money?
Yeah, it's HUD money. We get an allocation each year of that fund, those funds, and
How much is that total allocation this year?
about 1.2 million.
So that would be more than
Yeah, that would be a substantial amount. And I think what typically happens sometimes in these proposals, there's a request for funding of this nature that might exceed what is possible, and then there's adjustments to budgets.
What's your usual, is there an average that you normally award? Well, let me ask you, last year, what was our allotment and how much did we give out?
Well, with the funding of 1.2 million that we get, we have some in-house programs. We have first-time home buyer programs, et cetera. On a couple of larger scale projects, we have given fairly large awards, and how we're able to balance that was to do it over 2 fiscal years, but we've never given that amount of money to any one project. And probably would be safe to say it would be very difficult to provide that type of funding.
Without not giving money to other projects, I mean, that would result in
Right.
not awarding money to other projects that we have maybe in the past. Are those funds that are one-time grants, or they?
We get an
given annually?
annual allocation of those funds. And I think, as I said, that the likelihood of us being able to provide $950,000 for that project is probably remote.
What would be more reasonable now?
Well, again, it depends on a lot of different things. We normally, when we get a request for funding, we usually evaluate the proposal in much greater detail and looking at the different sources and before we make a decision on how we're going to fund the project. So, it depends on a lot of different things, and we have given up to $500,000 or $600,000 for individual projects in the past. Whalers Cove and Whalers Place were 2 large multi-million-dollar projects that we did. So there's a number of factors that we look in that makes the extent of the project, the impact on the community, and how many units are being created. And obviously on the capacity of the borrower too. So all those things are factored in. So it's difficult. I wouldn't want to throw out a number that would say that we commit to this project at this
Right,
time.
I understand that.
It's very preliminary, but it would be safe to say that 950 would be would not be able to assist on that level.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Saunders?
Councilor Morad had brought up an excellent point. Back 20 years ago, or even longer, we sold the Ingrahm Avenue School to a developer, lay vacant. While the economy was trying to come around, it burned down. It was a great fire and made a great mess to the neighborhood, and the developers walked away. And through the council at the time in Ward 4, they had to eliminate the safety hazard and to level the building so it wouldn't cause, they were complaining that people were inside the building and it wasn't safe at the time. And, they knocked it down. They got to take out the oil tank. And lo and behold, about 4 years ago or so, that oil tank finally came to the surface. I happened to go down the night that they found it and looked in it, and it had jolt bottles and styrofoam cups, so clearly somebody found it and covered it up. That's one of the problems that could make a real nightmare. That was certainly a nightmare for this council. It continues to be a nightmare. I think it's in litigation, and that's one of the bad things that can happen while we're waiting for funding and waiting for things to turn around. And who gets what when there's no money available and the stuff is burned out?
Thank you, Councilor Saunders. Councilor Duarte.
Can we hear from Lonnie? As you've heard, one of the concerns is that the property, if given to you for the amount that you guys are offering to pay for it, what kind of assurances does the city have that you won't flip the property? That you won't? Are you folks willing to put that in a RFP or a PNS that says that you're going to do exactly what you say you're going to do in an amount of time, and if not, that property comes back to the city?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. In all honesty, I would say that we expected that language to be in there. We would absolutely agree to restrictions such as you've outlined tonight about its sole use would be affordable housing and the proposal which you have before you. That if we were not able to meet either the timeline that is in that proposal and or with some slight fluctuation thereof, that again, it could revert back to the city. What I can share with you, and it is regretful to hear what happened with your property that was shared by Councilor Saunders. We're an organization that's been around for almost 30 years, and we've created over 55 affordable housing properties. And I can share with you a couple of thoughts about that. One is, if you were to talk to any of our partners in the cities that we've worked with over the years, you will not hear one of them say that we've ever walked away from a challenge or from our responsibilities. The second thing I would add to that is that we are also well known for bringing in projects on time and on budget. And you can speak with our state lenders and our partners about that statement. I would also say that we have a commitment here, just as you do, and we would want to see this property go to its very best use. And that's why we really want a chance to speak with you about your concerns and be able to address them as an organization that is focused on low-income members of your community. So I would have no problems as executive of my organization to sign the concerns I've just outlined by each of you, and that we would find resolution to any sort of issues that would come up, as well as keep you fully informed of your reports if that would be of assistance to the council to do so. I would also perhaps say too, just as funding sources would be identified and committed, they will also have distinct restrictions about the uses of what this property can be. So over and above, perhaps what we would sign with you, that the funding sources we would be looking to would also be making sure that this property would only be used for affordable housing and to benefit the constituents of that neighborhood.
On Friday, I had the opportunity to go through the Cushing Heights, Cushing Commons,
Yes.
property, and frankly, I was impressed. Certainly with what was going on downstairs. You had a drug counselor, a gang counselor, you had computers down there. It was nice to see, to be quite honest with you. From my understanding, that's your intention to do with this property as well.
Yes, something's comparable, yes.
Okay. With that, would you folks be interested or obliging to having like a HUD Tech Center there where, and other things that the community may say that they want? And on that, I know you talked about it earlier as far as engaging the community. If this was to move forward, when would you engage the community? When would you have these meetings? Where would you have them? How many meetings would you have? That's the most important thing, that everyone has a seat at the table, and especially some of the people, or all the people that are in that neighborhood.
Absolutely. And I would like to quickly address one of the questions, and also if it is okay with the council, to have my colleague, Ann Gilsman, who was our project manager for Acushnet Commons, come in and talk with you about the community process that we did on Acushnet that we look to do with this property as well. But I would say that we are absolutely open to everything you just outlined. We had already looked at how same sort of outreach possibilities as Efficient Commons offers through the services in North Star Learning Centers, as well as what the community room is able to offer even more broadly to organizations of New Bedford. But what I would also say is that, in all honesty, we would have started that process already with the community, had things gone differently. That as soon as a designation would have occurred, that would have been the very first thing that our organization did, because it's very important to us. It's not something that you can do prior to designation. It would have been 4 or 5 developers potentially reaching out to the same folks around this, and that would have not been an efficient use of their time. And so upon designation, we were ready to go, and then we had a hiccup in this, and so that's why we would look to you for that tonight. But if you don't mind, let me have Ann share with you the process that we do with Efficient Commons.
Thank you. Could you say your name and address?
Ann Gildspan. Yes, I was the project manager on Cushman Commons, and I will be the project manager now. There were some different situations there. We were designated, we had connected with the owner, so we felt free from the beginning to do outreach. And we spent, Maria Rosario was here, let's recognize her from North Star Learning Centers. She's their executive director. We are partners, and we did these community meetings together, and for a year and a half or so. I'm hoping we can do it more efficiently, since we're all interested in the timeline as well, but that we, through her and others, can meet with the various constituencies. I have to just digress for a second. When I had those meetings in the beginning, there were like 4 or 5 people lining the walls, wondering who are these people from out of town, and why they say they're going to do all of this and so forth. Now, this community room, which is not that big, but it's standing room only when there are monthly neighborhood meetings. And to me, that is the biggest sign that the community is feeling hopeful and wants to be engaged again, and I'm envisioning something similar. I can't tell you, exactly how it's going to go. I'm going to use common sense and start talking to people and see what we can come up with. But one thing I know for sure is that North Star wants to move their after-school program there, so that's a piece of the basement. We want to have a larger community room, like we have at the Cushman Commons. I'm so grateful that we were able to go and see it Friday. That's terrific. We want to replicate that. The rest, I'm not sure. I have to find tenants who want to move there and bring complementary services that the community feels they need.
But you're open to different tenants and different organizations outside of the
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's how we work. I've been with the agency 18 years now, and I could go on and on. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Dua. Are there any other questions? Councilors, what's your pleasure?
I have a point of information for legal counsel. Question.
Yes.
David, the motion in front of committee is a motion to rescind the vote that was previously taken. What's the action tonight if this body so chooses to move forward?
Well, my understanding is that the City Council has already rescinded its approval and then referred it back to the Property Committee for further discussion. Now, the RFP has been put out, it's been answered, and there's been a high bidder. Clearly, what they're looking for the approval, and the council committee can send it back to the council for approval if they want, or recommend that they don't approve it. If you want to send it back to approve, you could make certain conditions that the purchase and sale agreement have certain stipulations in there that the solicitor would work in. I think that, as was expressed by the organization, some of the things your concerns were already intended. They thought that they would already be in there, and I think the solicitor has some of those concerns already drafted in the purchase and sale agreement. So what you would have is you could approve it upon certain conditions being in the purchase and sale agreement, and even covenants that would be put on the deed, if you will, that could become part of the council's approval, so long as these conditions are put into the purchase and sale agreement or covenants on the deed. You don't want to stray too far away from what the RFP is, because the pricing is based upon the RFP. So you don't want to stray too far away from what the RFP states, but you could approve it with the condition that these certain conditions are put in the purchase and sale agreement, or it even has covenants on it.
Is it inappropriate to ask the solicitor to outline for the city property committee what the conditions of the P&S are going to be?
I'm not sure that she knows all the conditions that you're asking for. You could specifically say these are conditions, or she could alternatively give a draft to the committee. However, it's a negotiated contract, and it's difficult to go back and forth and negotiate. That's why I think it's probably more practical and effective if you say, these are our concerns, this is what we want to see in there, and then the solicitor mixes them in. But she could certainly speak to some of the concerns she's heard tonight, tell you whether she had those already in the RFP. However, the other issue is price. There's some concern about price, and is that an acceptable price? And if it's not, maybe the committee needs to meet and discuss privately what an agreeable price would be, which is allowed under the law that you could, in the executive session, discuss what price would be agreeable. But that, I'm not sure that, I think we did have some concern about price, but I'm not sure that's the overriding concern. However, the solicitor could probably answer, but you can do it with conditions, and I'm not sure how you want to go about it.
Okay, so to my original questions would be, if we so determined to be a motion recommendation back to the city council to accept, like we did the first time.
You could do that, yes. And you would, if you had conditions, you probably want to put them on a committee, if you, rather than send it to the council without those. Because then in the back here, you can't agree in council.
Madam Chair, was someone asking for the floor for Council Bureaucracy? Solicitor Schultz? Price, I think you know what we'll learn about.
I did recall some folks, I believe we were one of them, Councilor Morat, asking me about those reverter conditions, which I had incorporated in my draft, which has not been shared with anyone as a result of the other vote. Let me just tell you what I had incorporated, and then you can, as a body, tell me whether that's what you intended or whether you intend something further. I have provided an 18-month period of time for the issuance of a certificate of occupancy as one of the conditions. In addition, the buyer agrees as a covenant running with the land to develop the property in accordance with the provisions of Attachment A, which were the rehabilitation standards that went out with the RFP, as well as its proposal. All of those are considered as being part and parcel of this purchase and sale agreement and will be attached. As a result, if in the event the buyer fails to commence the work or substantially complete it within the above 18-month period, then after the 30-day notice period, I have a reverter going to the city of New Bedford as a result of failure to complete that project. In addition, I have a non-transferability clause. The buyer may not sell, lease, or otherwise transfer all or a portion of the property for a period of 4 years from the date of the recording of the deed to the property. Any mortgages or other encumbrances shall be subject to the prior written approval of the city during this 4-year term. These restrictions are to survive from the degree of the deed and would be incorporated in covenants. Those covenants will survive and will have effect on any other corporate successors that there may be. In addition, we agree to subordinate our right of entry to certain mortgages for which we have given the permission to mortgage the property. And we have given a cure period of 90 days except for violation of the non-transferability clause, for which there will be no prior notice and there is no cure. In the event the city does have to re-enter the property, then the city will simply re-enter the property and give the way that that's done. A statement is then recorded in the Registry of Deeds, and at that point the title to that estate shall revert to and be vested in the city of New Bedford. Any breach of any other covenant or condition also is subject to this right of entry, but it shall not defeat any lien or any mortgage to which we have given previous consent. In addition, I have made it very clear that this is an as-is sale and that the buyer accepts all responsibility and will hold the city harmless for any environmental issues, which would include the issues that Councilor Saunders was speaking about. And in the event there are any environmental cleanup that is to be done. The buyer will have sole and absolute responsibility to that, and will hold the city absolutely harmless for either making those repairs or correcting the condition, as well as any other liability resulting from that. What else I did there? I've added non-discrimination in employment, which I think we typically have not done. City officials and officers barred from interest in the project. I left open, because I expected that to be subject to negotiation, exactly when the closing would be. Obviously, there's a payment in lieu of taxes that always occurs. A successful buyer must always pay for recording fees. The deposit was going to be in a non-interest-bearing account. Present condition, we don't make any warranties as far as the property is sold as is. It's up to the buyer to conform with zoning and all other city requirements. In the event the buyer fails to fulfill any of the buyer's obligations, in sole discretion of the city, the agreement can be terminated and the sale canceled without recourse. Those are probably the highlights. Can't be assigned. Buyer's rights cannot be assigned without express prior written consent to the city, again, just as with the mortgages. And that's pretty much the purchase and sale agreement highlights in the draft that I prepared.
Do you make any consideration for the construction period and the city employees being employed, the percentage?
I have nothing in there for that.
I'm all set with that, thank you.
Councilor Saunders.
Suppose that year into the project, there is a catastrophic fire and then it's a total loss. Is there anything in there, or could we put anything in there that if we've given $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 in funds, that we give them back that money if there was insurance? I'm assuming there would be insurance throughout the commencement and to the completion of the build out of the property.
So it'd be a total loss. They would be incapable of performing. I'm trying to think if at that point we would exercise our right of entry and then we would have the property back again as opposed to the funds. That's the way I have the right of entry. I don't really, we don't have an insurable interest if we have sold the property. I'm not sure how we would get insurance proceeds. I think we would get the property itself.
That was what happened at the Ingrahm School. We ended up with the property and the problems that went along with it years later. Do we really want it back after a catastrophic total loss?
I guess it would be more in the nature of a performance bond. In addition to everything else, then we'd have to be looking for a performance bond or a
I just don't want to see history repeat itself.
I think probably letter of credit, my understanding is they are somewhat less expensive than performance bonds, and Ron LaBelle himself uses those more often than performance bonds to guarantee performance. It would be something in that nature, I suppose.
My last question, Councilor Shaw, is the price that was put on that, can it be raised?
Yes, it can.
And it would not affect the terms of the RFP?
No, it would not.
Because we are dictating the terms and not them.
That's right.
Thank you. I make a motion to table at this time till the next property meeting in a month, and I need some more time to think about it. You know, whatever else. If you don't want to table it, don't vote for it.
Is there a second?
Pardon?
Is there a second?
Motion to go to executive session?
Second.
Second. Move to instruct the city solicitor to renegotiate the terms of the purchase and sales agreement with a successful bidder and report the results to the committee within 14 days, and that the matter be tabled until the report from the solicitor is submitted.
Second.
I'll give this to you, Dennis. Thank you.
Motion's made, and there's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Motion to adjourn will be in order.
Motion to follow the action on items 2 and 3 of the chair.
Second.